Well, good morning, Epikos. How are we doing today? Good, that's great to hear. I want to give a special welcome to those of you joining us at our Mayfair Road campus, Sherman Park. Those of you joining us online, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, you wonderful people here in West Allis, welcome. Thank you for braving the cold and coming to worship our King Jesus here today. Well, my name is Jacob Michalski. I am the discipleship pastor here at Epikos Church, and I hope you all had a Merry Christmas. I hope you all had a Happy New Year, and it's just great to be back with you once again as we kick off a new sermon series here at the beginning of the year called What Happened Next. So over this past month, this past month back in December, we've been journeying through Advent, and we've been talking about the birth and the coming of Jesus. And we want to highlight some of the things that happened after those events in the Christmas story and talk more about them with you all here today. So let's recap where we've been coming so far. So we've looked at Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth, who were the parents of John the Baptist, and we looked at his miraculous birth and how God foretold how John the Baptist was going to be preparing the way for the Lord's salvation. And then, of course, we talked about Mary and Joseph and the miraculous conception of Jesus, Elizabeth's blessing over that child, and how she pointed to how Jesus, this baby in Mary's belly, was going to be the promised salvation for Israel. And that brought us to Christmas. And with the journey to Bethlehem, the eventful night of Jesus' birth with a house full of Joseph's family and a house full of shepherds and just the crazy events that were surrounding the birth of Jesus. But that is salvation that has come into this world. And as we've been focusing in the Gospel of Luke for this Advent season, Luke tells us that Mary's baby was later then circumcised after 8 days, as is proper for the Jewish customs, was given the name Jesus at that ceremony, and just like the angel had foretold. And then chapter 2 of Luke details another very important Jewish custom that happened a little over a month after the birth of Jesus. There was a custom where the parents of every male child, every firstborn male child, would bring that child to the temple and dedicate them to the Lord for him. They were already in Bethlehem at this time, which is very close to Jerusalem, so they figured they might as well go to the temple, do this dedication ceremony. And it was while at the temple that a man named Simeon, who is described as a devout Jewish man, is led by God to go to the temple and to see the Christ, to see the Messiah. And while Mary and Joseph are at the temple, this man, and keep in mind, he's not like a priest or anything, he's just some Jewish guy that lives in the region. This man takes baby Jesus into his arms and pronounces a blessing. This is what Luke has to say. It'll be on your screen for you. Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation that you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people, Israel. And then a prophetess in the temple area comes up and she pronounces a blessing as well on baby Jesus. And as I read through the Christmas story, I don't know, it just struck me more this time around this year of like how many random people come up to Mary and Joseph and like take baby Jesus and pronounce blessings on Jesus, and they like affirm that Jesus is the Messiah. And the rest of our time today is going to focus on yet another random group of people that come to Jesus to see him as Messiah. So I encourage you, grab your Bibles and turn with me. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 2. So we've been exploring the Gospel of Luke for our Advent season. We're going to take a brief pause in Luke because Matthew's Gospel has a very unique story for us. A unique narrative that we're going to be highlighting for the next 2 weeks or so, and then we'll dive back into Luke. Now, it's either sometime right before this ceremony that happened at the temple or right after that ceremony. The Gospel of Matthew tells us about some unlikely visitors that are also looking for Jesus. So I hope you're there. It'll be on your screen for you as well. Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 1. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and we've come to worship him." Now these verses here are just setting the stage for us and showing us the main characters of our narrative here today. Matthew shares with us that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, as we remember from Christmas Eve and that sermon there. But he also tells us the time period, right? It's during the days of who? The days of King Herod there in verse 1. And then come these random guys called, what our translation says here in the English Standard Version, wise men. Now, the word here that's translated wise men is the word magoi in the Greek. And the NIV actually just like transliterates it for us and calls them magi. These men called magi. Now, when I think of these guys, of magi, based on like my traditions, I think of images of kings, like dressed in robes, right? But is that really what the word magi reads? This is a brief little quotation here from a very prominent Greek lexicon, which defines Greek words for us. And it says that magoi, or magi, are wise men or priests who were experts in astrology, interpretation of dreams, and various other occult arts. That's a little bit different picture than I'm used to, right? Later in the New Testament, this word's going to be used to describe sorcerers. These men would have been well-versed, it says here, in occult practices. And apparently, these particular ones in Matthew took up astronomy for some reason, right? This could mean that they were either men of science or that they had a more supernatural kind of outlook on the universe and used the stars for prediction, like similar to like the zodiac today. I mean, it's really hard to pin down like a modern equivalent of what these magi were all about. I thought of like maybe some semi-famous astronomers like Carl Sagan or Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's got a popular YouTube channel for astronomy. They could have been just like a little scientist garage band that like managed to find like a donor for their next little pet project, which was the star in the sky. These men also could have been advisors to like a ruler, like similar to like a president's cabinet. Many kings would have employed men like this, magi, to interpret their dreams, to predict how they should rule and the next moves that they should make. Kind of like Pharaoh in the Joseph story, or Pharaoh in the Exodus story. He had the similar things. Even Daniel, the prophet Daniel, was one of these men that would have been like a consigliere behind the king. But we're not really sure about what exactly they are, or even exactly where they come from. Like, what does our passage say there in verse 1? They came where? From the east. Like, that's very specific. Thank you for that, right? There isn't much specifics on the background of these magi and where they even came from. Somewhere in the east could have been like Persia, the Arabian desert. Many scholars think that there was a community in Babylon that these men could have come from. Like, what is clear, though, is they're not from Israel, right? It seems that they were curious, that they might have dabbled a little bit in Judaism, but they weren't Israelites. But you remember what they said in verse 2. They said, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him." These guys get more and more fascinating, don't they? Like, they notice a sign in the stars that points them to a Jewish king, and so they embark on a journey to visit him and to worship him. Now, the big theory out there is that these magi were interested, or they were just curious in Jewish faith, and so they were looking for his star. And how do you think that the Jewish leadership is going to receive this news? Well, let's read on. Look at verse 3 with me. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. And they told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, or so it is written by the prophet. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are you by no means least among the rulers of Judah? For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel." The response was Herod and all of Jerusalem being troubled. They're troubled. Like the Jewish people were shaken. They were disturbed by this news from the Magi that are coming to see the King of the Jews. That was because, you know why? The current king of the Jews, the king of the Jewish people, quote unquote, was the guy they were talking to. That was Herod, right? Herod was the supposed king of the Jews. Now let's talk a little bit about this guy. Let's talk a little bit about King Herod for a moment. We know much more about him than the Magi. There's a lot of recorded history about King Herod. He was known later as Herod the Great, and he was known in history and born in around 73 BC. Now, with the support of Roman force, the occupying empire at the time, he swiftly eliminates all opposition to his rule and is made a puppet king of the Roman Empire, if you will, in Jerusalem by 37 BC. And so King Herod, he's a man of wealth, he's a man of political acumen, and his loyalty towards Rome allowed him to maintain favor with the consecutive Roman emperors that came after. And he wasn't Jewish, but he won over the Jewish people. Most notably, he rebuilt the temple around 20 BC. He even married a Jewish woman to be considered the ruler or the king of the Jewish people. And so Herod the Great, though, we have to know this as well, he was not a good man. He had a thirst for power that led him to impose heavy taxes on the people. In later years of his reign, he faced a debilitating illness that made him even more conspicuous, or it made him more not trusting of those around him and those closest to him, resulting in him executing his wife, his Jewish wife, right? And then at least 2 of his sons as well. He was not a good man. If you want to know more about King Herod, I want to encourage you, please come next week. He's going to be more of a focal point of the narrative as we continue. So come back next week to learn more about this guy. So when the Magi come to ask King Herod where they can find the king of the Jews, that's an obvious threat to this man's power, who we know how he acts when he's threatened, when his power is threatened, right? He acts with violence and vengeance. So Herod schemes by gathering the Jewish leaders and the scribes who know the scriptures, and they share that prophecy from Micah. Here's the prophecy in Micah. It'll be on your screen for you. You, O Bethlehem of Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from old, from ancient days. This brings us to the very first point that our passage is showing us here today, and that is that Jesus' birth fulfills God's promise. His birth fulfills God's promise. This prophecy here in Micah is not just some little prediction. The ruler mentioned in Micah was promised to be the one to save Israel, to save them from their captivity, save them from their bondage. And this ruler was to be a son from the line of King David that will rescue Israel and to unite the nation together, something that the Israelites haven't seen for 900 years. And this foretold king of the Jews is the Messiah, the long hoped for Messiah. And these Magi are looking for him. Now, many think that there is another prophecy that's at play here in this passage, in the beginning of Matthew, when the Magi are looking for this star. There's no star mentioned in that Micah prophecy, but the prophet Isaiah spoke these words. I'll put those for you on your screen as well. Isaiah 60, verses 1 through 3. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. Now, in this opening part of the prophecy, he's talking about Israel to arise and how the light of the Lord is shining upon you. Verse 2. For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples, but the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will be seen upon you. And the nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. You see, Isaiah sees the world in darkness. It says thick darkness on the people, right? But Israel will rise up as a beacon of light, and the glory of Yahweh the Lord is going to be shining, and all the nations will come to Israel to bask in this light. Isaiah is painting the picture of Israel as a lighthouse, A lighthouse that's going to lead the whole world into God's abundance and peace and salvation. It's a very beautiful picture there in Israel. And this is why the Magi saw this star and they followed it. There are a lot of theories as to what this star is that the Magi have followed. Like one commentary I read in researching this passage listed like 7 different possibilities, like 7 different theories. And everything from like supernovas and comets to even theories from like famous astronomers like Kepler, you know. Now, I'm not smart enough to understand half of them. Like, I'm a physicist. I'm not a physicist, right? I'm not a physicist. I'm a pastor. But there were 2 thoughts that really struck me as I was, like, listing through all these, like, different theories. And here are my 2 thoughts. And I think they can, like, all be boiled down into these 2 big buckets. Either, on the one hand, we have God in the creation of the cosmos. He placed something in the foundations of the stars. Something's all the way back in creation that he knew would be a signal to these magi, to these men, that would lead them to the birth of his son. And how amazing is that? How amazing would that have been that God had the foresight and the foreknowledge to see this part in history playing out and placing something in the stars way back at the foundations of the world that would lead these men to Bethlehem to visit and see his son. And he timed out the timing exactly. That's amazing. That'd be crazy. Then there's another group of theories that have another crazy claim as well. Like, what if this star in the sky is just, it's going rogue for a day? Like, it's taking a vacation from its normal route in the sky, and it's doing something totally different. It's on a mission from God to fly to the exact spot where God's son is supposed to be born. I mean, how baller of a move is that? That God has like a 900,000 miles like ball of gas on speed dial that he can just tell to go wherever he wants. I mean, that is amazing as well. Both options are crazy. And guess what? Pick your favorite. Like, just take a moment to just marvel at God's power that he's in control of these stars in the heavens. We won't know this side of heaven what exactly is happening on that night that the Magi are talked about here, or what they saw with that star. But we know that God played around with the stars for a couple of weeks to lead the Magi to this point. And that's the whole point of this story. Here are the nations. Isaiah 60. The nations are coming to bask in the light of Israel's Messiah, the King of the Jews. And that is demonstrated by these magi from the east searching for this king. And what are these Jewish leaders going to do with the nations at their doorstep, just like Isaiah prophesied? Well, let's read on. One second. Matthew 2, verse 7. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you found him, bring me word that I too may also come and worship him." Do you trust Herod here in this story? I don't either. No, I don't trust him at all. As we're going to find out later in this series, Herod does not have good intentions with this secret meeting with the Magi. And rather than going out to search with them, he wants these strangers to go out and then to come and report back to him. And this is going to begin the rising hostility of the Jewish leadership towards Jesus. And really the next point of our passage here today, and that is that Jesus' birth calls us to make a choice. Jesus' birth calls us to make a choice. God brought a group of foreign stargazers from another country to tell King Herod the Messiah is here and he is in Bethlehem. He even has the religious leaders come to back him up, to back up these magi with a prophecy. And King Herod and the other Jewish religious leaders are going to choose not to embrace Jesus as king. And they even grow in hostility toward God's son in spite of such a clear sign. But what will the Magi do, right? What will these guys from the east do? These foreign stargazers far from their home. What are they going to do with the information that they just received and then had validated by these religious leaders? Let's read the rest of our narrative here today, Matthew chapter 2, verse 9. After listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. We see here that God is still leading these men. Verse 10. Then they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and they worshiped him. Pause for right here. Mary and Joseph continue to have random people come into their house, right? You see it right there. These guys did not come empty-handed, though. Let's continue. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. So we see at the conclusion of this, that right here at the end of the story, how God protects his son, right? He protects his son and lead these magi not to return to Herod, but they go home another way through a dream. So to recap, our main points that we have here kind of form the main idea of this whole passage. The birth of Jesus fulfills prophecy. It fulfills this promise of God, and it calls us to make a choice. Fulfills prophecy, and it calls us to make a choice. Now, what was the choice that the Magi made? They did exactly like they said they were going to do at the beginning of our story, right? They said in the beginning they wanted to come to worship the King of the Jews. So they stepped out in faith. Or maybe it was just they stepped out in curiosity to see the thing that they saw in the stars. Then they were presented with this prophecy, and that is the Messianic King that would be born in Bethlehem. And they followed and they worshiped the Messiah. The two choices that were made, Herod to not embrace Jesus and the Magi to go and worship him, are total opposites. One is an openness and an acceptance of God and his will in this world, and the other is hostility and outright rejection to God's plans. And this is what Jesus does. Like, Jesus is still in diapers in this narrative, right? And just the very existence of Jesus on this world causes you to confront the reality you are living in and to make a choice. Are you going to follow him or not? Are you going to follow Jesus, or are you going to reject that he is who he says he is? And what is it that he says he is? I think that's very clear. This narrative is showing us and pointing us that Jesus is king. Jesus is king. So as we now start thinking about Jesus as this king, it is hard not to notice all the interesting aspects of kingship and kings that are on display and present in our passage here today. Who are the kings in our passage today? Obviously, we have King Jesus, right? The Messianic king. We also have King Herod, right? He's like the bad king. He's mentioned as king in the beginning of our story. But what about these magi? They're called the three wise men, right? Numerous songs and nativities portray them as what, though? Portray them as kings. Like they're wearing royal robes and crowns and carrying like these gold boxes for their gifts, right? Numerous songs and tradition paint these men as kings. But did you see that at all in our passage? Were they called kings? No. Called magi, wise men, these astronomers. But we always refer to them as, right, we three kings, right? But the scriptures never tell us that. They say that they have three gifts, but it could have been 2 or 20 of them. You know, who knows how many people were in this crew? How do we get the three kings of our nativities, right? Well, let's dive a little bit deeper into the history of that. The tradition of the three kings in the nativity story can be traced all the way back to year 225. The church father, Tertullian, was like the first early church father to really espouse this idea of like three kings. And a few centuries later, these three kings were eventually given a name in church history of Mechlon, Belshazzar, and Gaspar. Like, keep that tucked away for Jeopardy one day, right? Mechlon, Belshazzar, and Gaspar. Did we just get carried away, right? And just all of a sudden elevate these astronomers to kingship? Where does this idea come from with these stargazers suddenly being elevated to kings? Well, for that, we need to actually go back to our passage in Isaiah 60. Do you remember at the end of the verses I read here what it said about like the nations coming to the light of Israel? Then verse 3 says in Isaiah 60, it'll be on your screen for you again, the nations shall come to your light and kings to the brightness of your rising. Well, that's interesting, right? Isaiah prophesies that not only will nations come to the light of Israel, but also kings. If you look down further in verse 5, it says this, the wealth of the nation shall come to you, and a multitude of camels shall cover you, and young camels of Midian and Ephah, and all those from Sheba shall come. They shall bring you, watch this, gold and frankincense, and shall bring good news and praises of the Lord. Now, those are the specific gifts that are mentioned. They bear striking resemblance to the ones mentioned in our story in Matthew, don't they? The ones that the Magi brought. And this is why I think early church history tried to make this connection and elevate these Magi to kings. So what is Matthew doing here, right? We always think of these wise men or these three kings as a part of the Christmas story, but the reality is, they happened way after the events of Christmas night, right? In our Christmas nativity stories. But the message that these men point to is so vital to just Christianity as a whole. It spans the holiday season and the themes of the holiday season. This story here is so crucial to the Bible itself. To go so far as to call these Magi three kings like we do today may not have been Matthew's intention, but he did want us to connect this child Jesus and the light of this star to the Isaiah prophecy. So maybe he wanted us to connect them and to elevate them to kingship. I'm not sure. But in that way, these Magi are representing the nations coming to this child, the nations coming to Jesus as king. Now, why would these random men from the east choose to worship the King of the Jews? Isn't that interesting? Why is that happening here? They had no reason. These men weren't Jewish. Why are they worshiping the Jewish king? The Magi must have seen Jesus as more than a king over a people group, didn't Matthew is showing us that this newborn king is in fact the king of the whole world, the king of all peoples, and everyone should pay him proper respect and the honor that he's due. And so in the Gospel of Matthew, we are going to see that Israel rejects Jesus as king and stands in opposition and contrast to these Magi, these Gentiles. So I ask you, do you honor Jesus as king of this world like the Magi did? How do you do that, right? How do I honor Jesus as king of this world in my daily life? Well, let's start by diving into, what does the word even honor mean? What does it mean to honor somebody? A standard dictionary definition would be to show someone great respect and admiration. You show them great respect and admiration by, you treat them with very high regard, with value, with worth. That's how you honor somebody. Often honor is also attached to publicly acknowledging somebody's achievements. That's how you honor them. You publicly acknowledge them for their achievements or their contributions that they've made to this world and made to you in your life in particular. Do you do these aspects? Do you do these things with Jesus? Do you show respect and admiration to him, his life? Is he just 7-pound baby Jesus to you, or is he the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, King Jesus, as our passage says? Do you hold the teachings of Jesus in high regard? So a little bit of a teaser for next month, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And this sermon of Jesus outlines the basics of what it means to follow Jesus in his kingdom. Do you view his teaching in high regard, valuable, wanting to learn it, wanting to follow it? What about public acknowledgement? What about public acknowledgement that influence that Jesus has had in your life? In our day and age, we build statues. We put plaques on buildings to publicly honor and proclaim thankfulness for what someone has done in our lives. How can our lives be missional, sharing all that Jesus has done for us and living out the Great Commission of Jesus? That is what honor looks like. So as we close today, I think we can take the Magi's actions as a model for us and how to honor Jesus with our lives. We're going to be looking at each of these gifts that the Magi brought and use them as a helpful roadmap for us. Now, I'm not entirely sure if these gifts bear this specific symbolism or if Mary and Joseph would have even made these connections, but these gifts definitely would have been value. And as we're going to see next week, Mary and Joseph could use that money for a lengthy road trip that they're going to have to take before they return home. But come join us next week for that. But the three gifts that the Magi mentioned, the first one I want to mention is myrrh. Now, myrrh is this odd one in the group. It's a valuable spice and perfumed that would have been used during embalming practices. So this gift of myrrh, keep in mind, is given to a child. A baby that's just born is given an embalming spice. This gift could have easily been pointing to the eventual suffering and death of Christ, whose ultimate sacrifice on the cross for the sins of the world would secure our salvation. And so the very first step, I think, in honor for us, have you made that choice? Have you turned from your sin and chose to follow Jesus in his way of viewing the world as the only way to salvation? This is the very first step in honoring Jesus. And I would argue, if you do not embrace the sacrificial death of Jesus, you can't truly honor him, because his death was so vital and crucial to everything that he stood for and everything that he taught. On the cross, he paid the penalty for our sins so that we can have a relationship with God. Maybe you came here today just curious about church, or curious about God, just like the Magi were, right? Just curious. But eventually your curiosity, it led the Magi to bow a knee to King Jesus and to worship him. Eventually that curiosity leads you to make a choice. Are you going to follow and worship or not? Take that first step today. Turn from your sin. It's the fancy church word called repentance. And follow Jesus as King of your life. If you want to make that step today, I want to encourage you, let us know as a church. On your Connect card on the back, there's a spot to mark that says, I commit my life to Jesus. Mark that and put it in the black boxes as you leave here today, and we'll reach out to you. We'll guide you in the process of what it looks like to follow Jesus and to embrace him in your life. The second gift that's mentioned is frankincense. Frankincense was a valuable incense in that day, which would have been burned when you worshiped a god, in the temples especially. A gift to Jesus to represent his divinity, who he is as a God, the God. There's a lot that can be emphasized here on how to worship the divine nature of Jesus. I think you think about your regular presence at worship with believers. That's vital in worshiping Jesus. And it should be more than even on Sunday. Small groups and Bible studies, some sort of maybe rhythm with your family, a regular Sabbath practice or praying before meals, maybe even reading a chapter of the Jesus Storybook Bible with your kids or something. These acts of recognizing the God divinity of Jesus, these acts engaging in Christ-centered community are what lead us in worship. And after Jesus left this world, he encouraged his followers to gather as the church for this precise reason, to equip, to encourage, and to ultimately to worship Jesus as King. And finally, the third gift is what? Gold. Gold, very obvious, valuable resource given as tribute to a king, pointed to Jesus' kingship. The Magi gave what was most valuable to them, not just gold, but all the gifts. And not even the gifts, not just the gifts. Think about this trip far from their home to visit Jesus. We lose sight of this in the modern times. They didn't just take an Uber and plan a quick day trip to Bethlehem, right? No, they invested their time. They left their responsibilities back home. It would have costed so much more than money to take this trip to worship King Jesus. And the Magi see Jesus as King, and they show it by their actions as well. What is Jesus asking you to sacrifice, to give to him? What is the thing of great value that he is asking you to give? Is it finances to help somebody in need? Is it asking to sacrifice your time to dedicate to volunteer in a specific endeavor, whether that's a community partner that we have or even at church? Is he asking you to lay aside status or influence in this world to use your platform to express the values of Christ's kingdom instead of your own? Maybe there's something happening at work or at school that doesn't align with Jesus' kingdom. How do you, with grace and compassion, navigate that situation? I can't make these decisions for you. I can't tell you what you need to sacrifice and what you need to do. That is a decision only you can make. So as we close today, I just want to invite our worship team to come out and come forward, and I'm going to give us some time in quiet contemplation, some time to just consider these spheres of honor that we mentioned, the sacrificial death of Jesus, the divinity of Jesus, giving what is valuable to him. I want to give you a few moments with your heads bowed, your eyes closed, to just reflect on this idea and see where God is leading you to step into honor and sacrifice here today. And in a few moments, I will close us in a word of prayer. Let's bow our heads, close our eyes, and just take some time of reflection. Lord, we thank you for this narrative in your holy scriptures. We thank you for these wise men from the east that you compelled to go worship King Jesus, and what it teaches us on how to honor Jesus as King in our lives. Lord, I'm not sure what you laid on the hearts of my brothers and sisters here today, but I ask, Lord, your Spirit would give them courage to step into those moments and those times and those things of sacrifice and honor. Lord, I ask that you would lead them to see you as Lord of their life, that you'd lead them to see Jesus as King of the whole world and the one that's worthy of our honor and respect. I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.